like to take you on a little journey here of a little bit of my journey of what got me so into realizing that we may have gotten it a little off in not involving our own inner lives sooner in terms of helping children thrive. And so the first thing I am going to talk a little bit about is how that happened. And for some of you, you know that story, and I'll tell it briefly, but it was quite an event that caused that to shift for me from children to adults. And then I'd like to touch on a little bit of a project that I'm involved in and a couple of other folks in the audience are involved in at the Mind and Life Institute that is supported by His Holiness, and it's really looking at a framework of care that has quite affected me personally in terms of thinking about adult transformation. And then, how do we do this balancing act between our inner lives and what it is we offer to the world? And how can we make that more and more connected and in harmony? And finally, some strategies that might assist us in doing that. Now, I warn you that some of these may be in the Saturday meeting tomorrow for those of you that were particularly interested in this, because I do want to help with the timing. So, the other day I was interviewed by mindfulness.org, the journal. How many of you familiar? Have you seen it? Okay, and it was an interesting question that I hadn't been asked in a while. You know, why did you stay in education for 40 years? It's actually 44 years. And I realized that I felt that that was the place that I could most affect the future for children. And I actually still feel that's true today. I mean, think about it. Think about our society and think about all the places that children show up. And then there's this one particular place, in particular in this part of the world, that children show up regularly on almost a daily basis. Sometimes spend more time than they do at home in schools. And that if we began to affect some change in that place that they show up, wow, what a possibility. And that's what happened for me. And I really was taking Gandhi at his word, so to speak, you know, that this is where we'd have to begin. But as some of you know, and you lived through it, the 1990s were a pretty crazy time. I remember being with a group of 100 people, and thank you for bringing in Marian Wright Edelman. She was in the room, and several others were in the room, because we were crying and being together for a weekend that Ford sponsored, the Ford Foundation sponsored, to figure out how we were going to save our kids from killing kids. It was the height of youth violence that then began to spread all over. But at that point, it had reached its height of violence. And I remember coming home from that and realizing that we needed to figure out how to do this with children. And many of us started in a very similar time. Pats and others started at a similar time. I, in particular, helped to co-found what's called the Resolving Conflict Creatively program. And then, as we were going along, lo and behold, I get a call from dear Dan Goldman, who you're going to meet tomorrow, who was then mental health writer at the New York Times, and said, I hear you're doing something, like you're teaching kids about their emotional life. And we were about 5-6 years into it in the New York City schools at that point. And he said, I want to hear about that. Long story short, I started to fax him things. And I got off the phone hoping that maybe he would come and visit someday, never knowing I could count him as a dear friend and colleague. And then I got the New York Times the next morning, and we were the front page of the Science Times with this. because there wasn't time to do anything else, because it was the first time there was a shooting in a public school in the United States where a kid actually was critically wounded, and a teacher as well. And so he wanted to write about this, but he wanted to write about it in the context of solutions. And then, interestingly enough, his book came out very soon after that. And after Dan's book came out, we began to really talk about this term emotional intelligence, which, as he would tell you, he didn't define. Others in the field did, particularly Peter Salovey and Mayer. What is Mayer's first name? Where's my help? John Mayer, yeah. So anyway, but Dan popularized it. You know, like a lot of times you need bridges, and I'm glad he's going to be here tomorrow, between what it is we're learning and then how we can make it real in our lives, particularly in the lives of schools. And then we started to say, well, what would we call that? And I was in the room when we talked about that. So was Mark. So was Dan Goldman, where we said, well, if you do this with kids, we would call it emotional intelligence. Well, is it an intelligence? Should we use that word? You know, it was one of these deals, never thinking we were creating a field. So be careful, you know, what you think. You know, all of a sudden, like, watch your words, watch where you are, all of those things, because you don't know if that moment is a pivotal moment or not, all the time. It may happen that you meet somebody here that completely changes the trajectory in some way. How are we doing?
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Who can't hear me? Can you hear me? But they can't hear me. No. Okay. So we started to do this, a small group of us, and we came upon a very similar set of, a set of competencies that are still those competencies that we call social and emotional learning. And many of us alluded to this. And then we talked about, many people alluded to this research, and this is all on the Castle website, that we have good results doing this, especially in academic performance, which when it started to happen, it was not clear that we even cared about that or thought that was important, interestingly enough. Now it's the important thing, but for me, it's equally important that we teach kids these skills, regardless of whether or not we get them more prepared for academics, and that's great to hear, but their academic achievement improved based on standardized tests that I don't believe measure it. So I'm not putting a whole lot of clout in that. But it's good anyway. It's good anyway. I'm glad it's there. And then Castle began to talk about, and Mark showed this yesterday, basically, so what do these programs have to be like? You know, they have to be sequenced and all of these things. We even had a guide, and we're having a second guide come out, that says, look, here's the consumer report on which programs you should be using. Now, what sort of struck me now, only now, and I helped to found the field, is that, I know I'm exaggerating a little, but it was almost like teacher-proof. We were putting all the emphasis on the program, the method, right? But in each of these cases, it's a human being that will be delivering all of this. And yes, we got those results, but what do we know about that? And how has that interacted with what we know? We don't know much about that. Because as things developed in schools, we went more in this direction, that it's a research-based program, that it's done with fidelity, that all of those good things that we know as good teaching and pedagogy. But we didn't say, is the teacher mean? You know, we didn't check out those things. Yes, we did talk about that climate should be one that's friendly. But did we teach teachers how to do that? Did we teach teachers how to be calm themselves? regulate their emotions, all of the things we say we want to teach kids. So interestingly enough, so far our field is kind of based on what results we expect to see in kids, and teachers are kind of left off the hook. But we know now how critical teachers' role is. And there's been a whole swing back now in that realization. And of course, unfortunately, it goes then to teacher evaluation versus the realization that teachers need to be supported, and they can't do this, overnight. I remember a friend, Lee Schulman, who's from Harvard, said once, he said, look, I think doctors have it easy. They've got one patient at a time. At 20 years old in East Harlem, my first year of teaching, I had 37 kids. They were all different. You have that, some of you have that life on Monday morning, right? And you've got to be that diverse and varied. What does it take for you to be that balanced, to be offering that to a group of kids? And so I started to ask myself that question in 2001, actually a little before that, because I was fortunate enough to be in a group of the Fetzer Institute that helped to choose people that would get this fellowship that would help balance the inner life of mind and spirit with the outer life of service and action in your particular field. And I actually got it for education. And so there were many, many people in this group. There were 18 people in the group from different fields. And part of my work that I did during those 3 years of 98 to 2001 was to help edit this book, Schools with Spirit, where I started to ask this question: what would happen if we really acted like the inner lives of teachers mattered? And how could we familiarize teachers and students with themselves in a way that they would experience the value of all of this, that they wouldn't feel it was unnecessary or that just choose the right evidence-based program, So I was beginning to think about this really deeply, and I had the great fortune of the Fetzer Institute to help me with that, because we were on retreats regularly, and there was just a great opportunity to really spend a lot of reflective time, and it was very, very pivotal. But I have to say, always be careful when you get a gift like that, because you're really being prepared by the universe for something big, but you may not know what it is. And 10 days after the book was in every bookstore in America, 9/11 happened. And my office is 8 blocks from the former World Trade Center. This is a kid who saw too much before the shades were pulled at PS 234, which is right opposite. And then this is a kid 3 months later who's starting to try to make sense out of it. Wait a minute, couldn't somebody have done something? Aren't there heroes anymore? And this was before the Superman movie. I never wound up seeing the Superman movie, but I understand there's an exact image like this in the Superman movie. It's amazing. And this teacher who said this, in that instant, I felt like I understood what it means to be a teacher, because I could run no faster than this little kindergarten girl can run. And so we had a big, big thing on our hands. We had 8,000 kids that day, 200 teachers and administrators who rescued these kids, and they all were evacuated, and many of them didn't return to their schools for months. And it was this very untold story, very, very untold story. And the metaphor of the storm, I think, aptly captures the spirit, because both have the quality of predictable unpredictability. I mean, we all felt that when 9/11 happened, or most of us felt it. And it was totally unpredictable. When teachers, had to start realizing, they should have had sneakers in their locker that day and not high-heel shoes that they had to take off. I mean, just picture this, you're coming to school. You're responsible for kids when you're in school, but you're not thinking that you're responsible for making sure they come out alive, whole bunches of them. that you are going to be their parent and you can't even go to your child's school, which happened in a lot of cases. And teachers didn't jump ship, as we know. We hang in there. We hang in there sometimes at our own expense. And so we don't always know when they'll hit and what intensity. And we didn't know that after 9/11 either. What's going to happen here with these 8,000 kids? What's going to go on? How do we deal with this? And, we had things like this principal who's in her cafeteria. She's overlooking Ground Zero, and she lost her sister in the former World Trade Center. And as she was making a decision to evacuate the school, a police officer came in and he says, "Please do this quickly. This is going to be the morgue." And she knew she better not find out if her sister was alive or dead. She died, because she wouldn't be able to sort of adjust to this reality. She had to put it somewhere else, So a lot of people went through that kind of trauma. And they were asking this question clearly: how can I develop more authentic ways to live and act in the classroom that's balanced and that can start giving healing and recovery to kids? And what I noticed, however, was what my dear friend Wayne Mueller said. This is what was going on. The teachers were so good at it, they just kept giving, giving, giving. And then what happens? Have you ever had a day like this? You do good badly. Like you don't make it anywhere, but you got through your list. But, there's that feeling in your stomach like, was I really present for that? Was I really there for a kid? I remember one day where I'm insisting that a kid brings back his library book, and then he finally starts to tell me about this. And he's in the middle of basically saying a story that is that there was a shooting in his house, and the book has blood on it, So as he's telling, I'm about to say, just bring in and I'm thinking, just bring in the library book. Like, stop. What did this kid just say to me? But that's how automatic we get to sort of protect ourselves, to numb ourselves from the pain often that we have in the work that we do. So clearly, those who are helping others need a lot of help themselves. And Maria, you have any thoughts of what I should do, whether I should show this? Fine. But it won't let me. Now, I can't. Okay, let me just see. It wants to show the video, and we're not going to show the video. So is there a way of just getting it to the next slide? My trusty helper is here. By the way, the clip was from Parker Palmer, and you can see it another time. And maybe there'll be a way to show it in the Saturday workshop. Yeah, but we're not going to show it, so you're going to go to the next slide. Thank you. So Parker Palmer, how many of you know his name? Lots of you, great. He's definitely one of my teachers. And he says it beautifully. He says, "Small wonder then that teaching tugs at the heart, even opens the heart, even breaks the heart. And the more one loves teaching, the more heartbreaking it can be. The courage to teach is the courage to keep one's heart, not here, open in those very moments when the heart is asked to hold more than it is able." And so I want to talk a little bit about how do we do that then, and Parker also is the one that developed for me a wonderful concept of make sure you do the work before the work. So I didn't know what I was doing with the Fetzer Institute, and I didn't know that at the end of that time, in 2001, it ended October 2001, the 3 years, that I had an assignment waiting for me. And it was, quote, this is from the September 11 Fund, help the schools in Ground Zero recover. And pretty big, tall order. Luckily, synchronistically, I had been doing that work for 3 years. So I understood it. I felt ready to take on the assignment. I wanted to say no, I have to admit. It didn't sound good. But I knew it was my work to do. I knew it. And then we realized this, that we had to start creating different reality that valued and respected both the adults and the children, but still allowed them to function. You know, we had to kind of go back to normal, but we really had to start creating a different reality that could help them adjust. And so we began the Inner Resilience Program, which I'm still the director of, and I honestly thought that maybe it had a 2-3 year lifespan, you know, and then the work would be accomplished, basically. That's what my thought was. It's always good not to be a fortune teller, I think, you know, because it's like, what are you talking about? You know, it's going to be longer. Where am I going to get the money to do it? Who's going to help me? You know, all of those things. It's nice to kind of get it as we speak. And what really happened is that we began to create what I call, and what Parker calls, communities that hear each other into speech. And you know, clearly, we started to focus on the reality of how stressed these teachers were. And the reality was that this was all happening September 10th, and it's still happening in education right now. And finally, we're beginning to realize that it's the adults that we need to begin to take care of before we could give anything to kids, let alone you know, the good stuff we've been talking about here. We know this is true, and we know this is true, which is kind of tricky, because it's almost the same amount of people that are getting the higher stress levels, but they're at a loss of what to do with it. But, as Mark Greenberg said yesterday, and I'm really not a fortune teller, I put that in last night, emotional regulation is what creates resilience. And we began to realize that very quickly, that it was about helping teachers to come to that calm place within themselves and begin to work with their emotions. In some cases, 3 months after, they never told their story out loud to anyone how they were worried about their own kid that day. They didn't even speak the story. There was no opportunity for them to do any of that. It was all about taking care of the kids. And that often happens, right? That we don't give teachers and principals the opportunity for their own inner growth and their own transformation to be present for others. So I think that this definition of stress is very helpful for me, and I thought a lot about it when we started to do our work, that it occurs when there's a perceived imbalance between demands one experiences and the perceived coping resources someone feels they have for dealing with those demands. And it's, of course, a physiological reaction as well. But it is a perceived thing, right? Different people go through different things having the same thing happen to them. So it's about whether you feel you have the inner resources when adversity comes your way, and what are they? What's in your bank, or is your bank bankrupt? You know, is there nothing in the savings account? So that's a little bit of what began to guide our work. And the other thing that was important is that I realized that teachers high in self-efficacy do exhibit lower stress hormones. And what do we mean by self-efficacy in relation to education? We mean this, that there's this perceived ability, again, that I can be effective, I can find reasonable solutions, I can maintain a belief in my capacity, not somebody else's, to affect a change. And you know the feeling on days where you feel you don't have that. Like, wait a minute, these aren't the kids I had yesterday, you know, last year, or, you know, I better retire. These are different kids. I don't have this capacity to deal with kids that are coming in with these kinds of things, etc., right? So it really is about feeling like you can do that. You have the self-efficacy. So What do we know that transforms stress? Well, we know from the literature, particularly in the health field, it's things like this. Self-care, nurturing yourself, doing activities that forget about work. We also know, however, that if we only stuck with this, we would be in trouble. And most of the time, we begin to realize we need these things, but we forget that it has to be about what you said, Maria, that we're making meaning. We're making sense out of what occurred. And finally, all of those 8,000 kids and those 200 teachers had to make sense out of why them, And I remember studying with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she would always say, why not you? Even for a critical illness, it's like, why not you? So it isn't like this mean thing happened to you in particular. It's, again, perspective. And so these are some of the things that help with that. And more recently, however, I have a very newfound, wider framework for thinking about what we did after 9/11 and what we continue to do with teachers to this day as we help to nurture them. And that is the work of the Mind and Life Institute, which is involved in a program where we're beginning to think with His Holiness the Dalai Lama of, can there be some framework that we begin to think about? How can we equip young people worldwide with what it is they need to be those loving, compassionate, good decision makers that they need to be worldwide? And we've come after about a year of intensively looking at this question, a group of us, and Dan is involved in that, and Mark Greenberg and John Kabat-Zinn and other people are part of that group, that it's about this 3 modes of care we came to, after lots of thinking, by the way. But the 3 modes include the ability on our part, and think about yourself right now, to receive care, to develop self-care, and to extend care to others. Most of us in this room, I would guess, are very good at the extended care. But this concept is saying it's about all 3. It's about all 3. They mutually reinforce each other. And then when you ask yourself the question, well, how am I doing with self-care? Oh, I'm doing better with that, maybe. I would imagine a group like this choosing this conference and whatever. But let me tell you, this last year has been so interesting for me because the receive care, it's amazing. How many times things start occurring, and notice it for yourself, where, oh, no, I could do that, or, oh, no, it's like, can I receive care? And that is equally important to our ability to actually be there for other people as self-care is. So finally, self-care is getting on the list, but now we have to think of one more thing. And that's what started to happen. And of course, I love this photo, and some of you know it. The 2 twins who were in separate incubators. One was expected to live, the other wasn't. And the nurse who had the courage to put them together. And the second she put them together, one kid's hand went over the other's and stabilized his heart rate and all those kinds of things. That we talked about this, that there's an inherent possibility of compassion and love. But there has to be the fertile ground for that to happen, including with us. And so how do we go about it? Well, Angela Sarian's come in here again, too. And she helped me quite a bit. And she talks about the 4 healing salves. That's why I got you to sing yesterday. That's why we're telling stories. There's not enough music and dance, so don't expect that from me. I mean, that would be a bigger fee. We'll talk about that for next year. That would be a real stretch. But the reality here is that we need lots of modes, and Mark brought this up too. And I love that she calls them healing salves. And so when we went on retreats, and we've done over 35 retreats for teachers in New York City, and then in the other places we are involved with the Inner Resilience Program, Vermont and Ohio, and there's a site in Spain, Connecticut. We went on retreats and we took teachers away from Friday to Sunday. And that was big, that we would, then I realized we'd give them care packages. We did ritual, which is another important way of bringing in the inner life. Teachers introduce themselves by bringing an object, a photo or something, and then lighting a candle, acknowledging that they were here. At the end, we found out they taught 4th grade. It was kind of irrelevant that first night. This is really the ritual that has stayed the ritual for our work. We did a lot of yoga classes where we had physical movement, and they were very well attended every single day of the week. We had a training space. We did things like stress reduction, and we still do these to this day, where 3 body workers, and believe me, getting this approved in the New York City schools is a story and a half. So we call them stress reduction workers. We don't call them body workers. And we say, yes, the clothes stay on, and no, don't put me on the front page of the daily news of what Linda's doing in schools. But sure enough, I could go into any school in New York City. Oh, you're the massage lady. You give us the massages. No, I don't. I don't. Anyway, basically, think about this. This is all that we're helping them receive care. Why did that go off? I'm over? That's it? You liked it? Oh, there, okay. I thought I was, well, okay, just my imagination. Fine. You like to see how I'm doing with the regulation of emotions, I swear, really. Now, this is not moving again. Not moving. Help! I need receiving care, please. Hello, receiving care. Please come out somewhere. No, I'm serious. I'm not going to sing for it, but I do need you to come out. Okay, so thank you very much. Now you see, maybe even a year ago I would say I could do it. Seriously. Okay, so we also helped people learn some contemplative approaches. And this is where, I'm sorry to tell you, it's going to move forward very quickly. And it's going to be osmosis, total osmosis. Yup, it is. And it wasn't, but I do want to show you this. Some of you know that one of the things that we do a lot in our work is we create peace corners for kids in schools. And it's not a cooling off corner, and I talk about this in my book. And the kids always say, it's a place to go, and it's a good place to go. It's not like you've been told to go there, like a cool-off corner. So it's very contemplative. And the kids decide with the teacher. We have music playing. I like it. I'm just trust it. It's the Peace Corner. I like it. And a nice design, but I don't know where it's coming from. Anyway, and so I'm happy to say last week, the first school that decided to do a teacher Peace Corner. Just incredible idea, right? And now it's going to go viral, I'm sure. This is how it works with our work, that this is a Peace Corner for the kids. And then out of the teachers. And so I'd like to leave you with a poem, and then maybe if there's time, just a little bit of part of a book that I feel needs to be read. How many of you know this poem, Fire? Oh, very few. So this is a treat, and think about what it's telling you in terms of balancing your own life right now. So here's how it goes. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs, packed too tight, can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we're able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we could come to see how it's fuel and the absence of fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. That knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. And my hope is that there have been many openings here for you this week. And I kind of listen to what comes to me in meditation and prayer. And for some reason, and this may be for you, I got the thought that I needed to read some of this book. And what I just would say about it is, and it's this book. How many of you know it? A few of you do. I'd like you to think about a challenge you are now facing and imagine it moving forward with success, or a challenge you have faced and acknowledging you've been through it. I knew you could, and you knew it too, that you'd come out on top after all you've been through, and from here you'll go farther and see brand new sights. You'll face brand new hills that rise to new heights. I wish I could show you the stops that you'll visit, but then that isn't my choice for you, is it? Instead, I tell you some lessons and tales I've learned and relearned in my time on the rails. On the days when you're sad and you feel you can't go, speak up. Ask a friend for a tow. That's what friends do. Don't be afraid. You'd do the same if a friend needed aid. Try to remember the world is so wide, full of all kinds of people with their own trains to ride. Just stay true to yourself as you travel your track, with no second guessing, no looking back. If you rush forward, as a general rule, before you arrive, you can run out of fuel. Don't overwork, but save up some strength. That way, every day you can travel great lengths. You need all that strength on the days when you're stuck or tired or sad or just out of luck. When your belief in yourself doesn't quite sound so pure, and your "I think I can" doesn't sound quite so sure, that's when you push. This is for you. And you strive and you strain to show the world you're not a giving up train. And if you're wise, if you know that doing your best means that sometimes you should just slow down and rest. That's for me. Speeding through your whole life will bring only sorrow. Slow down today to be happy tomorrow. There's more about life that you'll learn as you go, because figuring things out on your own helps you grow. Just trust in the self. You'll climb every hill. Say, "I think I can." And you know what? You will. And this is a group of kids that made the thank you sign for the firefighters that rescued them from their school on 9/11 and escorted them to the West Side Highway. and I thank you as well.